Thanks everybody for coming. I hear some of us crunching away on popcorn. Sorry, that was our only concession. There are water fountains just back by the restrooms out and to your right. And we sold out of popcorn. Well, free popcorns, but really appreciate everyone being here for this historical museum talk on the L&L and other drive-ins here in Colorado. So this talk will touch briefly on the L&L, which was named for the Louisville and Lafayette Theater, which lay between the two towns and was owned by an indoor theater owner of each respective town. We do ask that if you have memories of the L&L, the museum would love to hear them if you're interested in sharing. Go ahead. You worked there? Fantastic. So there's a couple of ways that you can share your story with the museum. On the back table there, we have little notes of paper where you can fill out some of your memories of the place. Otherwise, you can grab an oral history business card. Scan that, sign up for an oral history. We'd love to come and record you. I know we were doing one right before this event today. Or you could talk to Sophia Imperioli. There she is, our oral historian. But again, we appreciate everybody being here. If you're here, you most likely like movies. And we want to let you know, Michael will talk more about drive-ins that you can go and see. But there's a movie here, Movies on Main Street, happening on Wednesday, July 31st, starting at 8 p.m. It's a free event. Everyone's welcome to come. And everyone's favorite ogre, Shrek, will be screened. So that's happening here in Louisville. Today we are honored to host this talk by the West's foremost drive-in movie historian, Michael Kilgore.
If you put them in the right order, Mike, actually, it's
sorry
really
about
true.
that.
Yeah, it's true. No
So
problem.
he's been recognized by the Library of Congress, and he's written a book about the drive-ins of Colorado. He's also written books about other drive-ins in states here in the West. You can see those all in the back, and they are for sale here today. He's gracious enough to donate his book to the museum, so if you're interested in coming by the museum and taking a look at that, we'll have that there as well. As a film preservationist myself, I found this book really incredibly interesting, and I hope you all as well do too. But again, thanks for coming to the talk. Enjoy the rest of the popcorn, and we'll have a brief Q&A after the fact. Thank you.
Thank you. They let me use this clicker too, which I'm going to get one just like this as soon as I get back home. It's lovely, but if something messes up, it's because I'm not used to this. But hi, yes, I'm Michael Kilgore. Don't have to say, okay, that's right, it's me. And we're just going to talk about, I've done a lot of research, a lot of histories of the drive-in theaters of the West, and I found, way too late I thought, that the most interesting part are the stories of the people behind it. I mean, just the bare facts of when it opened, when it closed, that's nice, but the people, it's kind of interesting. So we're just going to tell some stories here and go over some stuff. We'll start by talking about the histories of drive-ins in general, just to get everybody up to speed. I'll talk about the first couple of drive-ins that arrived in the state, and then because you all came here for the L&L, we got to talk about that. So we'll get about to that. Then I'll read a piece of my book for you so that way you can decide, well, okay, I don't have to get that. And then we can talk some more about the history of Colorado in general. And then finally talk about how it's getting a little better these days. So, like that. All right, well, this is from the patent drawings. Okay, well, y'all want to dim the lights? Make it feel more like a drive-in in here. Oh, yeah, that's a big difference, yeah. Okay, well, we're trying to strike a balance between that and keep the video guy happy, because he's got me wired, and I don't know. I think he can push a button and have bad things happen. But here we've got part of the patent drawings from Richard Hollingshead, who invented the drive-in. You can put that in quotes if you want, because before he filed this patent, there had been places where people had outdoor movies that people with a car could come up and watch too. So, but he did invent a lot of the things that then later became part of drive-ins in general. A fence, I think that's pretty smart, to make sure people can't just drive up without paying. Concentric arcs of viewings in the viewing field. He was the first one to do that, I'm pretty sure. Other things didn't work out, like be able to park your car and then sit in the stands in the front, not as much. But the big thing that he really invented was the ramp, where this would tilt your car up toward the screen. Now, you know, ramps, if you remember from your high school physics, that's what the teacher would have called like an inclined plane, one of the 6 basic machines, but he got a patent on it. So good for him. And so that worked out, you know, for a while. But there were some problems still. The biggest problem, and we get to experience this a little here, is sound. Like this, the pre-show is being broadcast out of that. They didn't have individual car speakers at all when he got this going. I mean, mind you, talkies had only been around for about 4 or 5 years, but he just blasted them from big speakers in the front. So if you were in the back, you got kind of an odd, it didn't sync up right. And then if you were a neighbor, boy, that would really annoy you. And now the other thing is less obvious, getting a good film to show. Because all the film distributors, they had the indoor movie theaters that they brought them to, and they didn't want to rock the boat. And the indoor theater movies didn't want to have anything to do with these drive-ins. So he had a heck of a time for 2 years trying to get decent films, and eventually he sold the original drive-in to somebody else who ran indoor theaters. So he was able to get that. Even so, it was not as popular, and it closed in a couple of years. Yeah, real quick.
Where was the original drive-in?
New Jersey, near Camden. Yeah. Yeah.
Do you know if he had any interest in doing this for silent films, or did it just not really happen?
No, it came out after the talkies, and so I figured that probably sparked some of it too, because the apocryphal story is that his wife was so heavy set that she couldn't fit into a regular indoor theater seat, and so that's why they did it, so then she could drive it up. But I don't know if that's entirely true or at all true, but that was the story that went around. But this one is the one that was a big hit. It was the first one to get an official license from Hollingshead. He would go around and make sure that if you built a drive-in, that you gave him some money to license it for your territory. So now the guy who licensed the Los Angeles territory made this one, and boy, it was a huge, huge hit. I don't know, it's because you got a lot of people in Southern California with cars, or you got all those movie stars who don't want to be seen when they go see a show. Could have been a lot of things, but it was a huge hit. It worked great. So this was like the first really successful one until the city shut them down because they still had those bad speakers and the neighbors were complaining. So the manager invented the first individual car speakers thing. He would hook it up to the front of the radiator and blast it through there, which was not the best, but it's a start. You got to start somewhere. And they were able to open the doors again. So that's the important thing. Now, here's a movie. I'm going to just go over here to click it, because this shows a bunch of the early drive-in things I want to talk about. So let's see if... All right, now, the sound doesn't matter much. From early on, they're trying to get the whole family to show up, not just like teenagers or... And then notice it's the motor end. We're going to talk about that for a sec. And this is short, really. Come on. 3 program changes a week. Hollywood's making so many movies, they could swap them out 3 times a week, every week. That's crazy now. That's how much content they were churning out. The outdoor concession stands, I never know if that's really was ever a thing, but it was on the 4th ramp, so there it is, but it was outdoors back then. You didn't go into a building. I do hope you went inside for the restrooms on the 4th ramp. Long-standing thing, get the little kids in, because the little kids are going to tell their kids they want to tell their parents they want to show up. And then speakers. Now, once they got the individual car speakers, that was a big deal for having the car on the cord and hang it on your window. And they were kind of expensive. It was like paying like $40-50 a piece these days to have them out there. So naturally, if something went wrong with them, they had to go get them fixed or get a spare out. And so they would say, hey, if you tear one off by accident, give it back. It'll be fine. Having their own power plant, I don't know about that. A lot of them had their own well for drinking water because they tended to be outside of the city limits. mention one in particular, but so the motor Inn. So now I'm get to skip past this. Let's see if this works. Okay, see? I guess maybe I won't get a clicker. Okay, next. Oh dear. Oh, here we go. I think we'll get this fixed. Minor technical difficulty. No, we're not going to see this again. No, no, don't do that. Okay, there we go. Now we're doing. Now that's more like it. Get back to a slide. Okay, whew. Oh man, technology, huh? Oh, thank you very much. I did that all myself. You saw. There's. Yeah, the reason why they were called the Motor Inn, because remember I said that Hollingshead and his crew would go out and he was suing people left and right. And so what drive-in people would do back then, they'd name it something besides drive-in. They'd call it the Motor Inn or the Outdoor Movies or the Motor Movie or something like that. Even though, we know it's a drive-in, but there you go. I got this picture to show, for those of you who weren't there, because I wasn't, what things were like in Colorado in 1940 or so. What entertainment do you have after a hard day of work? Here, certainly in Louisville, here, in the mines, you come home. What do you got? You got newspapers, lots of good newspapers. Well, lots of newspapers, and you've got magazines. Magazines were a lot bigger back then. If you wanted to listen to something, you've got scratchy 78 records, but it's something. And you've got the radio, which was back then, it was more recent an invention than the internet is now, so it's kind of cool. But otherwise, if you wanted to see some entertainment, you had to go buy a ticket to the local movie house. When every little city had a movie house, pretty much. So that would be what you'd go do for entertainment. There's no TV. Even though some people on the East Coast had TV, in the late 30s, early 40s, TV didn't come to Colorado until 1952. There's a big story about that, but that's outside the scope of this, so we won't talk about this. Just know it didn't come till 52. So, after World War II, many factors converged to make the drive-in really popular. First of all, everybody started owning a car. Before World War II, it was kind of iffy. The downtown movie theaters in the big cities, when you went to go there, you would traditionally dress up, look kind of nice. And so then you'd have to hire a babysitter for that too. Then you'd have to pay to park downtown when you went to the movies. Meanwhile, there's cheap land on the edge of town where you can build a drive-in. And the movies themselves were acceptable to the whole family. Most of them were like old westerns and stuff. Kids loved them just as much as grown-ups, just at a different level sometimes. So now, the real explosion of drive-in growth came in October 1949 was when the Supreme Court says, hey, you know that ramp thing? You can't just patent a ramp. It's a basic machine. Jeez. And so after that, then the doors are open. There's no patent. Everybody can make their own drive-in. It happened in Colorado, and it happened all over the place for 11 months until the Korean War started. And then the National Production Authority formed and said you can't use certain materials like copper for your wires unless for something that's so frivolous as entertainment. So that calmed down drive-in growth for a couple of years. All right, now let's go to 1947, Aurora, Colorado, the first one in the state. This guy named Leonard Albertini got a license from Hollingshead, and he came out to Denver looking for partners to build this thing that he had the license for. And for months he couldn't get anybody because they said, oh, it's too cold around here. You can't have a long enough season for a drive-in. But eventually they got a corporation of local bigwigs and a local theater chain owner named Harris Wolfberg. They put together about $150,000, which would be about almost $2 million today's money, to build this drive-in on East Colfax in Aurora. Its name, of course, was drive-in, just like that original one, because if you had the patent, that's what you called it. And so it opened on July 4th, 1947. On opening night, there was a traffic jam back up Colfax. for over a mile. People were trying to come in. The ushers with flashlights directed the cars to their spots. They didn't run their own concession stand. They hired somebody named Lem Lee to do the concessions, just farmed it out. And he made so much money on that, he's able to go off and build his own drive-ins. They hadn't figured out that part yet. So Leonard Albertini managed the drive-in, ran it, and he lived in the screen tower in this apartment.
Wow.
So, Wolfsburg, of course, just not just the first night, it was always a huge hit. All kinds of people wanting to come to this thing. So different, so much fun. And so Wolfsburg started looking for other places in the Denver area to build. And he started a drive-in chain that became known as the Compass, because in Lakewood he put the West, and in Westminster he put the North, which was originally the Motorina, but that's a whole long story. And in the South, it was Englewood. Then in its second season, they finally started calling this drive-in the East, because that's where it was. So the East prospered for many years. It added a Ferris wheel in its playground in '51. It made national papers in 1955 when across the street at Fitzsimmons Medical Center, President Eisenhower was being treated after a heart attack, and some Denver Post photographer climbed to the top, apparently of the screen tower, to take pictures down to get the first pictures of the president convalescing. So, neat trick. In 1965, they renamed this the East 70, but it had nothing to do with I-70. It was about the 70 millimeter film that they switched to, which shows greater detail at high resolutions on big screens, which, of course, that's what they got. They tried an AM radio system in 1966, and the side effect was if you were in an apartment nearby, you could hear it now as well as go out and see it. So the place got kind of run down in the 80s. But a couple of guys bought it and they cleaned it up, and they were trying to run special events to it and get like special zoning for these events. And the city kept turning it down because one of their neighbors didn't like them, and the neighbor was the mayor. So they sold it to a guy named Joel Boldry, who owned the East for the rest of its life. And that's that story. Now we're going to turn to the western slope, which is where the second drive-in was, in Grand Junction. It's a very different story. No patent license, for one thing. In 1938, a couple of brothers, Clarence and Lloyd Files, bought 160 acres on the east side of Grand Junction and made it a junkyard, place where they put old cars and things like that. In '47 was when Lloyd got an idea, even though he had never been to a drive-in himself. He just heard about how great this was, and he thought they could get in on it, which was pretty smart. So the drive-in that was slightly ahead in its construction compared to the east that was nearby was the one in Salt Lake City, which became the Auditorium. So they drove out to see it. It was almost finished at that time, and they saw how that was done, and they said, we can do that. So they came back, and they got a 40 by 30 foot screen that they made out of plywood and painted white. They got flue pipes in concrete bases for to run the wires for the individual car speakers. And they got the speakers from Ted Knox, who you'll hear again, a guy who did a lot of supplying equipment to a bunch of drive-ins in Colorado, and he actually owned a couple himself. Recurring themes. Says, hey, this drive-in stuff's pretty good. I need to make one. So the Starlight Drive-In opened in August 2nd of '47, just 4 weeks after the East. It was a big hit out there, too. Lloyd later said no one had ever seen an outdoor theater. They didn't know there could even be such a thing. So because of odd things, the Starlight had the Grand Junction market to itself for 4 years and was making a lot of good money. The brothers added a couple more ramps to the back of it to change it from 300 cars to 450. But then in the late 50s, mid-50s, the Chief and the Rocket, a couple other drive-ins, got sprung up close to them on the east side of town. And Grand Junction in general was expanding the way a lot of cities were back in the 50s. And then in 1959, this is the weird part of the story. Okay, now, meanwhile, in Naturita, which is not too far away from Grand Junction, this guy called William Moore owned the uranium drive-in. That was the sign for it. They picked it up and restored it and moved it after it went away, the drive-in died. So what William Moore did is he bought the Grand Junction Starlight, and then he took all the equipment and the screen and he moved it from the east side of town, you're looking that way, east side of town to the west side of town, and rebuilt it there and reopened it in like June, and in the 59 season. But after one more season of that, Clarence Files took back ownership of the Starlight, now on the other side of town, and he also got the uranium drive-in. So I'm figuring this is like having a used car lot where, yeah, we'll sell you this drive-in, but I'm carrying the note, and what are you putting up as collateral? And so if things don't work out, you swoop in and you take all that. Neat trick. So then Clarence sold it in 61 to a couple named Gladys and Ernest Barnes, and then 2 years later, he got it back again. Pretty neat. So it limped along until after the 1966 season. So the other two drive-ins, the next two drive-ins came in Pueblo and Colorado Springs, and we can come back to them later if you want to hear some more stories about things like that. But I know why you're here. You're here for these guys. The L&L, the local drive-in, which was actually, well, depends on how you look at it. It was outside the Louisville city limits. It was outside the Lafayette city limits back then, but now it's just barely in Lafayette. So if you look at my book and you say it's in Louisville, it's kind of wrong. But there you go. I learn things. I learn things all the time. But these are the two men behind this thing, and they've got a very interesting story to me. Carmen Romano over here, the only pictures I get of them was late in life, which is kind of sad, but there you go, they're late in life. He was a miner starting off. He worked at the Monarch and the Black Diamond, and he eventually became superintendent at the Black Diamond. But in the evening, for a side job, he would work at the Rex Theater in downtown Louisville. And in the 1940s, he bought it from the owner, San Bielli, the guy he used to work for. Meanwhile, over in Lafayette, Walter Hauser owned and ran the Lafay Theater in downtown, and his day job was being a teacher and principal of the elementary school, where his wife would also taught too. Good spot. So in the spring of 1952, they made an odd announcement that they were going to build a drive-in between the two cities on a plot of land that Carmen owned, and they would do all the construction work themselves. Now that's kind of cool. And so that's why it was going to take them a long time to build, and it did. The next year, in 1953, it was almost ready. They hired plumbers for the restrooms, so that's good. And they hired Ted Knox for the projectors and the speakers. There he is again. But they sank their own well for water, just like they had. It was a narrow field, and the screen was 36 by 48 and tilted forward to better match the angle that people were seeing it. This little skinny projection building was only 12 feet deep, but it was 60 feet long. And this here is the only picture of the L&L that I know of at all. If anyone's got another photo of the inside, the outside, the sign, anything, that would be nice. But meanwhile, it really existed. That's a good thing. So the L&L held its grand opening on May 15th, 1953, and then had to close for a week because the rain had made the dirt they just put in there too soft, and they needed to dry it out and then get some more cars in there to pack it down so they wouldn't get stuck. In 62, there was a glimpse of the relationship between Carmen and his wife, Ann Romano. Ann told the Louisville that they were going to try to open on a particular date in April. It said, we'll open Thursday if it snows. And then Carmen said, we'll open and it will snow. So these two were married 50 years, and so that's a shout out to me. But in 71, they sold the L&L to the two partners, to Darrell Decker, who had worked as a fireman in Louisville, later he was elected to something. I didn't dig too deep. A year and a half later, Carmen also sold the indoor Rex to Daryl. Ann said later that we sold the Rex because he lost his sight and the kids got mean. So I hope it weren't you mean kids. In '75, Daryl leased both of those theaters to some outfit from Lafayette called MSB Associates. Now, doesn't that just sound like a place that you just cranked up as a new business to run something? Then in '79, there was another company, Richard Bateman's Theater Services and Management, ran it for its final season, as far as I know. Maybe it closed either before the '80 season or after the '80 season. And for some reason, they renamed it the Starlight. Everybody else always called it the L&L. We all call it the L&L. But for why do you even bother? Anyway, so there. In November of '83, Boulder Community Hospital bought the land from Daryl and demolished the drive-in to make room for a community medical center. They put a small office in the front, and they were hoping to build more, and that's a long story too. But up until 10 years ago were those ramps, but now it's a housing development. Yeah.
Which side of South Boulder Road is the lot?
Is north side. Yeah, see, this is a north-south thing. So it really was like that. And if you go to a site called Historic Aerials, where I spend a lot of time, you get to see what a particular piece of land looked like, 50 years ago, 70 years ago, 70 years ago, up until like recently. And then you can even compare back and forth, see when something changed. If I was doing indoor theater history, it wouldn't help much, but it's really great for drive-ins. So, I'm going to read a piece of my book, but first I want to talk about some of the things that are not in the book, because they were so common that they happened all over the place. And this was one of them. Yes. People snuck in without paying, often in the trunk, sometimes with in the back seat with a blanket over it. And back then, theater owners got to keep most of the money, or sometimes even all of it, from showing, from the ticket prices from showing the movie. Nowadays, almost all of it goes to the distributor, and they only make their money on the concession stand. So that was a big deal, cat and mouse stuff, and all kinds of stories about if somebody's driving in alone and their back's kind of sagging. You might want to watch that car, yeah. All right, come on, click. There we go. Couples. Some couples would get more interested in being with each other than in whatever the movie was showing, and some of those couples became parents. Yeah, thieves. People did, the box office did a lot of cash business, and so they were plagued with people, hold-up guys who just drive up to the box office, stick them up, drive off. Pretty easy. So there was some of that. But I don't talk about it much. Wider screens. If they hadn't yet, by the mid-'50s, late '50s, most drive-ins added a wider screen. Then they started with the narrow TV aspect ratio screens, well, the old style, CRT. Well, you all remember. Talk to the kids, they don't know, but the CRT screen. But now they've got the wide screen. So that came in the mid-'50s as they're trying to fight against TV. Oh yeah, back then they had playgrounds, usually up front, sometimes by the concession stand, and sometimes they were elaborate, like the Ferris wheel, and sometimes they had miniature trains, and otherwise, most people had at least like a seesaw or a swing, get their kids' wiggles out, and of course back then, you didn't have to worry about like insurance and getting sued, and you just bolt this heavy metal stuff into the concrete and let them go at it, because this is how you get tough as you grow up. And Sunday mornings, a lot of them would have church services, especially Easter, of course. And that was a nice thing to do. And flea markets. Toward the late 60s into the 70s, a lot of them figured out they could open up the place during the day on Saturday mornings, Sunday mornings, to have a flea market, keep the concession stand running again, make some more money that way, and just make whatever money they can. It's like free money to them. Okay, there's one other thing, is that, like the original Aurora place, they kind of blew off the concession stand. They figured that out pretty quick after that, and that's one of the big reasons they went to double features, so that they could have an intermission in between to drive people to come buy more good food stuff, or well, at least food stuff. So I could show you this, or I could just read you a chunk out of my book here. So this book contains little histories, a lot like the L&L there, except maybe written better, I don't know. But they've got little histories of all these drive-ins. So I was going to start with one that's unusual in that it's still got a happy ending. Most of them we start with what I call the tombstone dates, opened, closed, and how big it was. But I'll talk about, here. I've got a slide for this. I want to talk about the Holiday Twin. Colorado State's Hughes Stadium on the far west side of town was under construction when the Starlight opened across Overland Trail, which is the name of that street in between. Former Fort Collins resident Paul Corey had returned to build a single-screen drive-in. High winds blew off part of the screen tower in the spring of 1969. I don't know whether it was a coincidence that Highland Theaters took over operations in April that year. By the mid-1970s, Corey was ready to sell. One deal in late 75 fell through because a bank declined a loan. Who'd want to put a loan out for this? Highland added a second screen and split the viewing field in 1976, now calling the drive-in the Holiday Twin. The same name as one of Highland's drive-ins in Boulder. In 1978, Corey continued to advertise the drive-in for sale. Enter Wesley Webb. Now, drive-in theater owners often flew airplanes as a way to save the cost of shipping heavy reels of film. But Webb was an experienced pilot before he got into the theater business. He bought and sold planes, and he saw drive-ins as investment opportunities, big pieces of ground that make money while they appreciate in value. Somebody told Webb about Corey's desire to sell the Holiday Twin, so he flew out to Fort Collins to check it out. The story Webb told was that when they were negotiating, Corey said, "What I really want is just your airplane." And so they made that trade, and Webb owned another drive-in. Years later, Webb said that he added the Holiday Twin as a tax write-off and as a place for his son to learn the movie business. But he fell in love in Fort Collins, getting married there in 1997. When Webb sold the rest of his drive-ins in 2001, he kept the Holiday Twin, promising that he'd never sell it. He still owned it when he passed away in 2019, and his widow still owns it today. So like I said, most of them, they close. Now, the other big chunk of the book is that I have, in between, I have certain intermissions where I try to talk about topics that don't really fit as a particular drive-in. So this one is, I can use my clicker again. This one is Golden's claim to fame, mainly, the Reed Speaker Manufacturing Company. Colorado had an important, though overlooked, role in the drive-in theater industry. It hosted two of the largest companies that repaired drive-in speakers. The first of those businesses was started by Samuel M. Reed. He was born in 1900 in Indiana, and he worked for RCA in Colorado by the early 1930s. Back then, Reed installed photophone equipment, RCA's standard for syncing audio with film. By 1936, he managed photophone sales and service for the entire Denver theater territory. During World War II, RCA gave Reed a leave of absence to run movies for the American Red Cross with former theater man Homer Ellison. In 1945, they formed the Ellison-Reed Visual Aid Service in Denver, with Ellison handling the sales and Reed the service. That didn't last long. By 1948, Reed had joined Western Service and Supply Company, an RCA equipment dealer. I get the feeling that Reed, in his late 40s about that point, was looking for more fulfilling work. He took a leave of absence from Western to run the indoor Placer Theater in Fairplay for more than a year. After he returned to Western, he started tinkering with drive-in speakers in his garage in Golden. Finally, in early 1953, Reed launched the business that would become Reed's Drive-In Speaker Service. Theater owners would ship speakers for rebuilding and reconing, swapping in fresh speaker cones, and get them back for much less than it would cost to buy new speakers. Looking at the insides of so many drive-in speakers led Reed to invent improvements. The business morphed into the Reed Speaker Manufacturing Company, still with facilities in Golden. Reed patented a new, smaller type of speaker, simplified for easier maintenance. He registered drive-in audio patents well into the 1970s. Even at the peak of drive-ins, speaker repair was a niche business. But Reed's company was not alone. Denver man Frank Horn said he had the largest speaker repair company in the country, if not the world. Got to get the words right. National Speaker Reconing and Manufacturing Company reconed thousands of drive-in speakers each year, plus speakers from other industries. Horn had been in the electronic business since 1946, fixing radios and TV sets for 10 years before switching to drive-in speaker reconing around 1957. The company moved from 17th Street to 15th Street in 1969 and continued to advertise in box office through 1970. In 1973, Reed Speaker moved from Golden to a plant in Lakewood. At a trade show in 1979, he demonstrated a device that provided the benefits of FM radio sound. Before most cars had FM radios. It attached to a drive-in speaker and relayed the full fidelity audio from a transmitter in the projection booth. The Reed Speaker Company continued to advertise in box office until Reed's death in 1995. Good long life. Let's see what else we got here. Tell some more stories. Come on. Oh yeah, we got some more history we got to do. So as I said, the biggest surge of drive-ins was from October of 49 until September of 1950. That's how it went in Colorado too. The 16 drive-ins opened during that period, just 11 months. Many of them in smaller towns such as Sterling, Montrose, and Lamar. Of course, this one in Montrose is still open. Highly recommended. By the mid-50s, just about every little town in Colorado that wanted one had one. Norwood, Ignacio, Dove Creek, Hotchkiss, all these little towns had drive-ins. Then the large metro areas started adding more drive-ins. By 1958, 80% of all drive-ins that would ever exist in Colorado had been built, and some of them had already closed. Over the next 30 years, all those drive-in benefits that I talked about earlier, they all fell away one by one. TV. Once everybody had TV, they don't need to go out to see a movie. They've got TV. And the TV started with crazy expensive sets. I mean, really, if you look up how much it cost in today's money, it's amazing. But they got less expensive, and by the end of the 50s, everybody had a TV. Hollywood movies, they shifted from being something the whole family could watch to being more for stuff that either for kids or for grown-ups, and not too much that appeals to both. Indoor movie theaters, now you could go in casual clothes. And a lot of those indoor movie theaters were coming to the suburbs where they had parking lots, and it was all taken care of. Daylight saving time went national in 1965. Home box office opened in 1972 and with commercial-free uncut movies. And the most lethal factor, though, was the video cassette recorder. When they got cheap and video rental stores opened up everywhere, you could go there, get your own double, triple feature or whatever for cheaper than going to do the movies yourself. Along the way, drive-ins tried to give patrons what they couldn't get on TV. You know, that's why in the 50s they were doing all those widescreens. Then when the kids stopped coming, they started switching to like teenager or young adult movies, and sometimes they'd be horror movies or titillation movies or some of both. And sometimes they were R-rated, and sometimes they were worse than R-rated or more than R-rated. I don't know if you call it better or worse, you know. And then as the cities expanded, they often encircled the drive-in land, which used to be at the edge of town. And so when a developer wanted one chunk of land just to build some nice big thing, Walmart here, then they just go, boom, done. One person, you got it all taken care of. Colorado also had, you know, that happened a lot of places, but Colorado had one extra factor that was included in the decline of drive-ins, was the boom and bust of mining towns, of mining in general. Coal in Walsenburg, uranium in Naturita, oil shale in Delta, like here. Once they were gone, people didn't have the money. If they were still around, most of them left, all that. Along the Front Range, a few theater chains chased the suburbs and added drive-ins out in the suburbs. And a few small towns added drive-ins late, such as Comanche, the Comanche in Buena Vista, which still exists today, also highly recommended. The Arrow in Lamar, gone. And the last 20th century drive-in built in the state was the Burlington in 1976. The Burlington closed in 1985, and it was not alone. Most drive-ins made it to the 1980s, but fewer than 24 of them made it to 1990. Those VCRs killed them all off. There are still some overgrown ramps that are like 60 plus years old in a few places if you know where to find them. But I won't leave you there. The drive-in soon regained popularity. But let's see if we can squeeze another story in. What time is it? Oh, it's getting... Yeah, I want to have some time for Q&A though. I could tell you about in Cortez. Real quick, I'll buzz through. There's one of the first drive-ins in the state was a little makeshift one in Cortez. An 18-year-old named Philip Belt, who lived in Dolores, put up something called the Independent Drive-In. It was on the northwest side of town. It was on US 160, and it was just south of Chubb's Cabinet Shop, where I still don't know where it is. It's the only drive-in in Colorado where I don't know where it actually was. It only held 75 cars, had 2 shows a night except on Fridays, and it started with just 3 outdoor speakers, but then after 4 weeks, they changed to 40 speakers, 1 for each pair of cars. It closed for the season that October, the October of 1949, and never reopened, but Belt began working as a projectionist the next year when the Arroyo Drive-In opened in Cortez, possibly even on the same site as the Independent. Could have been, I don't know. So that's, there's that. And then, oh man, the Delta story. I don't think you guys are ready for this. You want to hear the crazy war story? Yeah. All right, now, everything here is what I got from the newspapers. I don't know any of this myself. If any of you are related to any of these people, don't sue me. All right, in Delta, the first drive-in was the Skylight. Max Story from Meeker opened it on May 10th, 1949, so it was just the second one on the western slope. After 3 seasons, he sold his share of the drive-in to his partner, Edgar Jones. Then came the True View. Story returned in 1955 and started developing the True View, Delta's second drive-in, just a stone's throw away from the Skylight. The Gunnison River flooded in June of '57, which made it a shallow lake. He sold it to Stanley and Ann Dixon, and then the Dixons sold the drive-in, the True View, to Austrian immigrant Fred Chubka and his wife June.
Say that again.
Chubka. Chubka, yes. Well, it's really handy in that there aren't a lot of newspaper mentions of other Chubkas. Unlike most last names, Fred Chubka and his wife June, some of the central players in the saga I will lay out here. Meanwhile, over here at the Skylight, the guy running it was Jones's son-in-law, the guy who owned the place, William Taggart. So, there's the True View. Within months of buying the True View, the Chubkas started seeing an odd pattern of vandalization. In January of '58, somebody destroyed the marquee, broke every window in the cashier's cage in the concession building, and whacked the projectors with hammers. In September, they ripped out over a dozen speakers and 72 of the wires connecting some of the other speakers. And in October, 24 speakers went missing in one night. In 1959, Taggart was also running Delta's indoor Egyptian theater, another place still there. Whoa, that is nice. That was also the year, though, in 1959, Taggart persuaded June Chubka to sell him her share of the True View Drive-In. Fred Chubka continued to run it, but that must have been awkward. Then came the fire that shut down the True View. In July 1960, a teenager started a blaze that gutted the projection building and concession building. And I don't say anything more about the arsonist because the arsonist was a juvenile at the time, and really. So then October '61, the Chubkas sued the Taggarts for causing the fire, even though the arsonist claimed to have acted alone. Probably not. At the trial, the Chubkas' lawyer introduced evidence that June might have been mentally ill when she sold her share to Taggart. That's not a good marriage. That trial ended in a hung jury. The Chubkas refiled the lawsuit to be heard a few months later. And then on the day that second trial was to begin, they reached an out-of-court settlement, and apparently it seems like Chubka then owned both theaters. And in August of 62, June filed for divorce. So Fred was running both theaters by September of 63. Delta Police Chief Dan Morgan and James Hansen bought the TrueView as part of the divorce property settlement. And then a few months later, the guy who was running the Egyptian, Tom Hardy, bought the Skyline and renamed it the Big Sky. Because you saw that there was a big, oh, here's the Big Sky, yeah. Well-preserved remains here. I took this picture just in 2019. So there were more ownership changes. In 1968, Jeannie and Stanley Dusnut bought all of Delta's theaters, and they said when they walked into the TrueView's projection room, the walls were still black from the fire. But when Delta got hit with the oil shale bust of the 80s, these new guys, the Dusnuts, knew they had to close one of the drive-ins, and so this one had more light pollution, they said, and so they kept the TrueView running, and the TrueView is still running today with new owners, but that's still there. Now, then I would talk about this little guy in Monument. Guy Carlucci Jr. of Fruita, son of an immigrant turkey farmer, partnered with A.B. Moore of Colorado Springs, built this guy for $45,000 of 1958 money. The big screen, 97 feet wide, 57 feet high, and it opened in June of 57, closed for the season that October, and then the next season it didn't really reopen until finally in June there was an announcement that it was open under new management. And then there was another break for 11 days in July and August when they reopened with improved light and projection. They must have had some problems. And so during those periods when it was open, Grand Junction's drive-ins outnumbered its indoor theaters 4-2. So there's probably too many drive-ins. And so it closed after the 58 season and it never reopened. And Guy Jr. became a Fruita historian, and yet his obituary never mentioned a drive-in that he co-founded and built. Go figure. And A.B. Moore, I still don't know anything more about that guy except his initials, or where he came from, or any of that stuff. But now, happy ending before we run out of time. In 1991, Disney started a trend toward family-friendly movies with Best Picture nominee Beauty and the Beast, which this reminds you of, but if I used a Disney slide, they would come after me. Other filmmakers tried to copy that success with animated movies that mom and dad could enjoy along with the kids. And then studios started making comic book adaptations and other kinds of comic booky action movies that grown-ups and kids can enjoy at different levels. Meanwhile, now almost cars have FM radios, and so they could all the theaters could switch to FM radio transmission. So instead of chasing around all those speakers, they could just run one FM transmitter, and the sound is better, and everybody's happy. The next problem, though, was in 2013, the studios switched to sending movies out with hard drives, which are a lot smaller and easier to ship than stacks of big, heavy reels of film. And so drive-ins had to find usually like $100,000 per screen to update their equipment, because drive-in projectors have to be powerful. So most of them actually did, though, and for the ones that survived, now they can show TV shows or live sports in the evening, or some do video games, all kinds of stuff. You can put anything on there now, and they can get fresh movies really easily. You don't have to wait till somebody else is done with a print for you to get a copy of that movie, because it's just a hard drive and a password. Meanwhile, in Colorado, after a gap of almost 40 years, the first 21st century drive-in popped up in northern Denver, where a trade show marketplace saw what it could do with a section of its parking lot. And then the next year, a guy in Austin, Texas, was running a pop-up drive-in and said, Colorado's a lot cooler than Austin in the summer. And so he started running it here in Minturn. Neither of those used ramps, but otherwise they were drive-ins. And now it's 2024. It's well after the start of the COVID pandemic. That was a big benefit to drive-ins when COVID, well, it's not a benefit of drive-ins when COVID came around, but it showed how you can stay socially distanced and still watch a show. And oddly, the 50s, there was just that same level of concern about polio. So it was an echo of the past. But at that time, in other parts of the country, brand new drive-ins, little pop-up things popped up next to like indoor theaters. I don't know if there were any in Colorado. I haven't really noticed them, and if there were, they've gone by now. Meanwhile, the Denver Mart closed, and then they took their drive-in with it. The new owners didn't care for it. And that guy from Austin has been staying in Austin, so that's kind of sad. But there's still a lot of good drive-ins, including the Star in Montrose, the Star in Monte Vista, and the Mesa in Pueblo. They show no signs of stopping. In Monte Vista, you can get into a motel room and watch the movies from there. That is so cool, so unusual. So I hope that these active drive-ins stay active and continue on, because it's really fun to go to drive-in, to feel the cool air going through. Well, you hope it's cool. And you get to enjoy, talk. Some people would smoke in the car, and when you want to go get food, there's food up front. And for a relaxing, fun evening, nothing beats the drive-in. So there you go. The end. And now I'll have questions if you want.
Yeah, I'll just ask that folks use the microphone so we can have
So
this
then the
recording.
videographer doesn't have to figure out, what are they asking?
Yeah. So feel free to raise your hand if you've got any questions or comments.
All right, here we got
Go
one.
on. Fabulous.
I don't know if this doesn't seem to work. but-
It's through the recording.
Oh, is the closest active drive-in now the one in Fort Collins to us here in Louisville?
No, the 88 is still alive.
Oh, I thought that you said
Yeah,
that was
they announced
closed.
last year that they were going to close, but they stayed open this year, so who knows for how long. Yeah, I'm here, and if you want to send me an email, then I'll write back. So that should warn you. And you can come by carload.com, and if you want to see Joe Bob Briggs actually talk nice about me, which I was so happy about, then that's there.
Looks like we've got another question back here. Yes.
Of the still open drive-ins in Colorado, which one's your favorite?
Like asking to pick your favorite kid. I prefer the Holiday Twin to the 88 among the close ones. The Mesa was nice. I used to know the folks who ran that place. But they've got really good food. It's kind of nice when there's good food. I always, I'll tell you a side note here. Some drive-in owners get really fussy about bringing in outside food because they make all their money on concessions, and so it's like going to the McDonald's and bringing your own food. That's not cool. But on the other hand, I think, well, if you got a captive audience, you're pitching all these ads at them, you should be able to make money on your food if it's any good. Mesa had really good food down in Pueblo. And equally distant is the Comanche, which is which is west of Buena Vista. They pronounce it that way.
Yeah.
And they're both about 2.5 hours from here. The Comanche is the highest elevation drive-in that I know of anywhere. So it's got that going for it. But the Star in Montrose, Pamela Friend there runs that place, and it's an amazing thing. I've got pictures of the concession stand in my book. They opened in 1950. They've got an old-style concession stand. You walk up to it, and they serve you. They go around the counter and give you your food. Most places have switched to cafeteria once they figured out that goes a lot faster for the intermissions. So there's those. I mentioned the Star in Monte Vista, where you can go and stay at the Movie Manor Motel. That is fun. Another different fun thing. You go to the True View in Delta while that's going around. So that's most of them. And I missed the ones that are closed. Yeah, this is a political answer, though.
Like a kid,
Yes, you don't want to say who your favorite kid is. Because they'll come back around. Yeah, did you hear what he said about?
Any other questions for us?
Hey, here we go. Yeah.
How prevalent were or are drive-ins in other countries?
But that's a good question. In other countries, drive-ins were not uniquely American, but it is where they took off most. Canada has a lot of drive-ins and had a lot of drive-ins, except for in Quebec, where for religious reasons, they tell me, they held off on it until the late 60s, early 70s. You were not allowed to build one. But yeah, there are some in Europe. Australia has a few scattered around like that. They existed, but they didn't really catch hold. You need car culture to have a drive-in. You got to have people, everybody having a car. That's very American. Yeah. And so that's why I think U.S. It's such a very American thing, is the drive-in.
Well, and one of your books is on drive-ins along Route 66. And
Oh,
so
yeah.
that car culture is,
Yeah,
is right there.
Yeah, I know. Well, that's the thing got me started writing these books, is that I'm walking around and all of a sudden it hit me, the idea of a book I wanted to read. And if you don't have it yet, you got to write it. So, you got Route 66 and all the great car culture, and you've got drive-ins, and really the heyday of both of them, overlap so much that someone's got to write the comprehensive story of all the different drive-ins that existed on Route 66 back then. And so that's what the book tries to do, goes through every drive-in that ever existed along the way. It did not go through Colorado, so that's why I wouldn't bring it up otherwise. But, yeah, and so it's got the same kind of stories about each one of these drive-ins and the same kinds of intermissions, including the one in Colorado. Colorado Springs there was a place that made a lot of the drive-in trailers that you'd see for the intermissions. For a while, they were one of the big movie studios, if you will, because they were cranking out commercials, what we call commercials now. A long story about that. It started in Lakewood and went to Colorado Springs.
That's great. Any other questions? I think we're about at our time, so perfect timing.
Okay. Hey,
Again,
yeah,
if you've
straight
got
forward.
memories of L&L you want to share with the museum, we'd love to hear it. And again, if you've got more questions, please reach out to Michael Kilgore. He's been
And
fantastic.
if you got any photos of any of these things, any
Please.
old drive-ins, because I always say that there's somebody's scrapbook, somebody who was a projectionist, or somebody who owned the place, or somebody who worked in neon signs for the marquees. They've got these scrapbooks around, and they've got all these images of them. I've got a picture from the Motorina that I got from a sign company in Denver just before it closed, because it's clear. And I said, yeah, go look through our files and see what you can find. Or then I got the stuff from the McCormick's down south. They offered me some of the pictures from their family album, where their dad, which standing around in front of the screen like that. But that's really cool. How else are you going to see that stuff? So, if you know somebody who is like that, and they've got a scrapbook and they've got the photos, that's a great place to find them.
Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you. Well, thanks for letting me use that clicker. That's fun.